My cousin always said, "You were never really family." So I waited until she was desperate, bought the family business she wanted, and left her with nothing. Let me just start with the truth, I didn't plan for any of this. I'm not the kind of person who wants revenge or even likes being involved in drama. But family drama? That's a whole different beast. Family ties you up in knots you can't always untangle. My name's Daniel, Dan to anyone who knows me. I'm 41 and spent most of my adult life working corporate finance in Chicago, barely seeing my family and living off coffee and instant noodles. At the time, I thought I was building something. I was glued to my desk, skipping holidays, and working through birthdays, all for that ever-elusive promotion. Then, 5 years ago, the stress caught up with me. After a pretty rough burnout, I had a moment of clarity, or maybe it was just exhaustion, and finally decided to come back home to New York. I thought a slower life consulting for small businesses would be better for me. But, funny enough, coming back home didn't mean an easy reunion with my family. That's where my cousin Talia comes in. She'd been running the family business, our grandparents' Italian restaurant, for the last few years. We weren't always close, she's 5 years younger than me, and our paths diverged when I left for college. I was the one who went away, while she was the one who stayed. I admired her for that, at first. She'd done well with the restaurant, turning it into more than just a cozy local spot. She'd expanded into catering and even opened a bistro downtown. For the first couple of months after moving back, I'd see her occasionally at family gatherings. We'd exchange small talk, but there was always an edge to it. Every time, she'd managed to slip in a comment about how she was the real backbone of the family, the one carrying our grandparents' legacy. "You know, Dan," she'd say, always with this little smirk and a sip of her wine. "I guess you just didn't have it in you to stay here, huh? Some people are cut out for family business, and some people just aren't." I'd just laugh it off. But over time, I felt like I was being shut out of my own family's legacy. She was quick to remind me that I'd left, as if that somehow disqualified me from being part of the family story. One day, after a string of small jabs from Talia at my mother's birthday dinner, my uncle pulled me aside. I could tell by the look on his face that something was up. "Dan, you got a minute?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. "Sure, what's up?" I responded, following him out to the porch where we wouldn't be overheard. He looked over his shoulder before sighing, and then, after a beat, he dropped the bomb. "Talia's in trouble," he said, rubbing his temple. "Big trouble. She took out a loan against the business. Didn't tell anyone, thought she could expand on her own, but she's in over her head." I could barely process what he was saying. "A loan? How much are we talking?" "200 grand, he replied, voice full of disbelief. "She wanted to open that bistro on 5th, but it's not bringing in the kind of money she promised the bank. Now she's scrambling, trying to make payments by shifting money around from the main restaurant. But, Dan, if she keeps going, she's going to bankrupt everything. The bank's already threatened to start seizing assets." I stared at him, trying to process the situation. "And she didn't tell you?" I asked, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. He shook his head, visibly frustrated. "She didn't want anyone questioning her. Said she had it under control. But now, it's a mess, and she won't admit it." A tense silence filled the air as I tried to make sense of it all. Finally, I took a deep breath and said, "Let me look at the books." I spent the next few weeks practically living at the restaurant, combing through Talia's records. To put it bluntly, it was a disaster. She'd been covering up losses with money from other parts of the business, cooking the books to keep up appearances. But she couldn't hide the fact that her big expansion idea was draining everything. After weeks of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Talia one night, my voice simmering with frustration. "Talia, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, Dan," she replied with a scoff. "Are you still poking around in the books? You know, just because you left your high-stakes job in Chicago doesn't mean you can swoop in and fix everything here." "Funny you'd say that," I shot back, "because you're about one payment away from the bank seizing the restaurant." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, but she didn't say anything. "You really thought you could cover this up forever?" I continued. "You should have asked for help months ago, Talia. Now we're running out of time, and the business might not survive this." She sighed, exasperated. "And what? You think you're the answer to everything? This is my business, Dan. I don't need you swooping in like some hero to save me. I have it under control." I laughed, but it was bitter. "Under control? You're hemorrhaging cash, and the bank's ready to repossess. This isn't control, Talia, this is a ticking time bomb." Her voice turned cold. "Listen to me, Dan. Just because you can read a few spreadsheets doesn't make you family again. You left, remember? Some of us stayed. I've put everything into this place, and you just come waltzing in, acting like you're part of this family again?" Her words hit me hard. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to lash out. "I'm just trying to help," I said, keeping my voice steady. "For the family. For Grandpa's legacy. I thought that mattered to you. It matters to me, she snapped, but I don't need you to be the one doing this. I can handle it. I don't need someone who didn't stick around pretending to care. For a moment, I thought about arguing. About telling her how much it hurt that she saw me as nothing more than an outsider, how it wasn't fair that she got to decide who was family and who wasn't. But then I realized it was pointless. She'd made up her mind. Fine, I said, my voice calm but ice cold. If that's how you feel, I'll back off. I hung up, feeling a knot of anger, sadness, and frustration in my chest. I tried to put it all behind me, to let her run her business into the ground if that's what she wanted. But that wasn't so easy when I knew the restaurant might go under because of her stubbornness. About 3 months later, I was having dinner with my parents when my uncle called. He sounded frantic, his voice barely holding back panic. "It's Talia," he said, not even bothering with a greeting. "The bank, they're calling in the loan. She's desperate, Dan. She's trying to sell the business to cover the debt, but no one's willing to take it on with those numbers. Please, can you help?" I sat there, gripping my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. She was about to lose the restaurant. Our grandparents' pride and joy, the place that had been our family's heartbeat for decades. And for what? Because she couldn't let anyone else help? After a long silence, I finally spoke. "Tell her I'll buy it." "What?" my uncle asked, clearly taken aback. "I'll buy it," I repeated. "If she's willing to sell, I'll buy it. But I'll only do it on my terms." A week later, I met Talia at the restaurant. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her usual confident smirk replaced with a haunted look of desperation. "So, you're buying me out," she said flatly, not meeting my gaze. "If you want to keep the bank from taking it, yes," I replied. "I'll pay off the debt and keep the business running, but you'll have to sign it over to me entirely." She clenched her jaw, a flicker of anger flashing in her eyes. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching me fail, swooping in to play the hero." I shook my head, my voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want this, Talia. But you made it clear you didn't want my help. You made it clear I wasn't family enough to be a part of this. I'm only stepping in because I can't stand to see Grandpa's work go to waste." She laughed, but it was bitter, almost mocking. "You know, Dan, just because you saved the business doesn't mean you're family again. You'll always be the one who left." I looked at her, feeling a strange mix of sadness and anger. "Fine, Talia. You're right. I left. But maybe this business needs someone who understands that sometimes, walking away is better than destroying everything around you." We signed the papers the next day. Talia's name came off everything, the signs, the menus, the accounts. And that was it. She was gone, just like that. She packed up and left town, leaving me to rebuild what she'd nearly torn down. It wasn't easy, and there were times I questioned why I'd even bothered. But slowly, with a lot of hard work and a little help from the rest of the family, I turned things around. The restaurant is thriving now, and I feel like I'm finally honoring my grandparents' legacy. As for Talia? Last I heard, she's living in a different state, working in a mid-level management job. The irony? She's the one on the outside now. Over the next few months, the restaurant transformed in ways I could barely believe myself. My uncle, aunts, and even my parents came together to support me, and I hired some trusted help to streamline operations. I introduced a new menu inspired by my grandmother's original recipes and hosted weekly family nights to bring back the sense of community we'd always had in the early days. It felt like we were rebuilding, not just the restaurant, but a piece of our family's soul. Meanwhile, whispers started making their way around town about Talia. Some said she was living in a cramped apartment in a town a few hours away, working as an assistant manager at a chain restaurant. The thought alone would have mortified her back when she was queen of our family's empire. Then, one night, about a year after I'd taken over the restaurant, Talia came back. I was working in the kitchen when one of the waitresses rushed in, wide-eyed. "Dan," she whispered, "you might want to come out front." I wiped my hands, a knot of curiosity forming in my stomach as I walked to the front of the restaurant. And there she was, standing awkwardly by the entrance in a simple black dress that seemed more suited to a job interview than a family visit. She looked worn down, her usual polished appearance replaced with an exhausted, almost desperate look. "Dan," she started, forcing a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Talia," I said calmly, giving her a polite nod. "Didn't expect to see you here. Everything okay?" She took a deep breath, glancing around the restaurant. It was packed, every table full, laughter filling the air, waitstaff weaving around each other. It looked like a well-oiled machine, nothing like the chaos it had been when she left. You've really done something with the place," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked almost pained to admit it. "Thanks," I replied, not offering anything more. The silence stretched between us until she finally spoke up. "Listen," she started, shifting uncomfortably. "I was wondering if we could talk somewhere private. It's important." I led her to the back office, where she perched awkwardly on the edge of the chair, fidgeting with her fingers. She looked around at the office that used to be hers, her gaze landing on a framed picture of my grandparents I'd hung on the wall. "So, what's on your mind, Talia?" I asked, sitting down across from her. She cleared her throat, and in that moment, I saw the last remnants of her pride crumble. "Dan, look, I know things got messy between us. And I know I didn't make it easy for you. I let my pride get in the way, and I made mistakes." I kept my expression neutral, letting her continue. This was the moment I'd waited for, but I wasn't about to let her off that easy. "I'm in a bit of a rough patch," she went on, struggling with the words. "The job I took, it's not what I thought it'd be. I'm barely making ends meet, and I was hoping, maybe I could come back and work here. You know, just until I can get back on my feet." There it was. The request I'd thought about 100 times in the quiet moments before sleep. A part of me had dreamed about the day she'd come crawling back, asking to be a part of the family business again, needing my help. I let the silence hang for a moment, watching as her eyes darted to the floor, unable to meet my gaze. Then, slowly, I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. "You want to come back here?" I asked, making sure my voice stayed calm. She nodded, a hint of relief in her expression, thinking I'd already agreed. "Yes, just for a little while," she said quickly, like she didn't want to give me a chance to change my mind. "I could help out with the accounts, maybe work with the suppliers, just until I can save up a bit." I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. "And why should I let you back in?" She swallowed, glancing away. Well, I know I wasn't fair to you. I know I said some things I shouldn't have. But Dan, we're family. I know I screwed up, but family is supposed to forgive, right?" I felt a flash of anger, thinking back to all those times she'd made me feel like an outsider, someone who didn't belong simply because I'd moved away for a while. "Family," I echoed, letting the word hang in the air. "Family, huh? Like when you told me I was never really a part of this family because I left?" She looked away, her face turning red. "I didn't mean that," she mumbled. I was young and stupid." "Funny how that's only obvious now," I replied, standing up and walking to the door. "Talia, I don't think you understand. This isn't your business anymore. It's not even our family's business, in the way you think. You see, it's mine. And it's only succeeding because I put in the work that you weren't willing to. You may be family, but that doesn't entitle you to a place here." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw real fear in them. "Dan, please. I'm asking for a chance here. Just a few hours a week. I'll do anything." The tables had turned. The control she'd once held over me had evaporated, and now she was at my mercy. But this time, I wasn't about to let her get away with it. "I'll tell you what," I said, opening the door. "We need someone to help with the dishes in the evenings. It's hard work, you'll be on your feet for hours, and the pay isn't great, but it's honest work." Her mouth dropped open, and I could see the indignation rising. "You want me to wash dishes?" she asked, her voice full of disbelief. "That's the job I'm offering," I said, keeping my tone firm. "Take it or leave it." She stared at me, the anger and humiliation plain on her face. But she was out of options, and we both knew it. Finally, after a long pause, she nodded. "Fine," she muttered, barely able to meet my gaze. "I'll take it." She started that very night. Watching her scrub dishes and take orders from the same kitchen staff she'd once bossed around felt like poetic justice. She'd humiliated me, treated me like I didn't belong, and now she was back at square one, forced to start from the bottom. Every night, she came in, did her job quietly, and left without a word. And every night, I saw the resentment in her eyes as she realized just how far she'd fallen. Over time, the staff grew to like her again, but not out of respect. They tolerated her because I'd asked them to, as a favor to me. Talia had become just another worker, no longer the queen bee she once thought she was. Eventually, about a year later, she saved enough to leave, moving on to a low-level accounting job at some other restaurant chain. She never came back to our family business, never asked to take back what she'd once claimed was hers. And as for me? I carried on, making the restaurant stronger than ever, building a legacy that honored our grandparents, without the toxic pride Talia had brought to it. These days, I hardly ever hear from her. Our family gets together every holiday, and if she shows up, she sits at the edge of the table, just another guest, no longer holding the place of honor she'd once claimed. And every time I look around at the family, at the business I saved and rebuilt, I'm reminded of a hard but valuable lesson. Family is earned, not demanded. And when you try to claim it as your own, just for the power of it, you might just lose everything you once thought you controlled. In the end, Talia's own arrogance was her undoing, and I was able to give my family, and myself, a place to truly belong. She was right about one thing, I wasn't family to her in the way she wanted. But now, thanks to her, I found the family I'd been looking for all along.